Hi everybody. I thought I'd share some stories from my time in the hospital because I thought some of them were kind of amusing or interesting or something. So when I arrived in the hospital, one of the first things they did was they gave me the COVID-19 test, which is like this swab. It's like this long, and they stick it as far up your nose as you can possibly imagine. Your eyes water, and it's quite uncomfortable. Important, useful, all that stuff, but definitely uncomfortable. And then, so I was in this little room all by myself for a few hours, and then they sent me up to Ward 6. Ward 6 seemed like a funny place because no one seemed very interested in anything that was wrong with me. They would give me paracetamol to try and get my temperature down, but no one was asking any questions about what had happened or how I felt or anything like that. There was just this, and everybody's decked out in all the personal protective gear, all the shields and stuff, face shields, and scared stupid of everybody. And there was a doctor. This was one of the big clues. This doctor came in, and he went around everybody in the room, which is unusual because usually a doctor is focused on a particular doctor and a particular person with a particular treatment. But he went around everybody in the room individually and asked them only questions that were clearly COVID-19. Do you have COVID-19 questions? And the guy got quite stressed because he had a very simple face mask, like this guy, ta-da, which we were wearing fairly regularly, and he wasn't happy with this. He went up to the nurses and said, I really want an N95 mask. I really would like, please, can I have an N? And the nurse is like, sure, you can have an N95 mask, which are I think the ones with the little ventilator holes on the side and they look a bit fancier. And it was quite petulant. He was like this sad little annoyed child, and they gave him one almost immediately, and he just sprite right up. He was so much happier. And he went on his way asking more people whether or not they had COVID-19. So it seemed obvious that this was the COVID-19 holding cell, and this was actually clarified with the nurse later on. But so what happens is you come to the hospital, they lock you into this Ward 6, and while they wait for the COVID-19 results, and then if you pass, then you get sent off to a ward where they'll actually try and treat you. Otherwise, they'll fire you off to the COVID-19 ward. While I was in that ward, in the Ward 6, the holding cell, I was moved around a few different rooms within the ward. I was quite lucky because I was moved from a room with 4 patients to a room with 2 patients. And as I was moved out of the 4-patient room, a belligerent, angry man was moved into the bed space that I had just been removed from. And this guy, throughout the night, was screaming, "I want to piss!" He was telling the entire world, and I guess he needed assistance with this. And he got very angry. He was swearing like a trooper. I know it's difficult when you're in hospital, but still try to be nice, The people that are there, the doctors and nurses, are trying to help you. They don't need abuse. I've always thought that assistance from medical professionals was a bonus. It's not a right. And I think you should respect that. I don't ever expect miracles from medical professionals. I just assume they know a bit more than I do. And as long as they have a decent crack at it, you win, you lose, whatever. Having their assistance is much better than not having their assistance. Anyway, so I'm still in Ward 6, waiting to leave. Very happy I'm not in the room with the man shouting about piss the whole time, very loudly. And I'm actually in a room with a guy who has quite serious lung cancer in the second room. And sort of one of the first things that happens is that a doctor comes in and speaks to him and explains that, if something starts to go wrong with him, they'll do everything they can, but they're not going to be able to resuscitate him. So would he please sign this piece of paper that said it's okay not to resuscitate him? He's like, well, I would rather you were a bit more positive about this. But it turns out that all the ventilators have been reserved for COVID-19 patients. So this guy with the lung problems, there's no ventilator for him. So if it comes to the point where he requires one, he can't have one. Therefore, he gets to die. So, there's cost to COVID-19 that goes beyond people who die from COVID-19. There are people like him who also expire as a byproduct. So, yeah, that was a bit grim. Nice guy, though. Then I finally get, after being told, no, I'm not moving out of this ward until I've lost my temperature for 24 hours. There was no way that would possibly happen. And then I was going to move to Ward 2. And then I was going to move to Ward 1. And then eventually I did move to Ward 1 at about 11:30 at night. It was quite interesting lying in that room late at night, because it seemed like you could hear everything. There was a guy, pretty rough guy, not nice, sounded like a nice guy, but he'd had a pretty tough life. He was an ex-gang member, whatever. Kept going on quite loudly late at night about how much he loved his wife and just needed to get home. And at some point he started singing Ave Maria, which was just extremely odd. It didn't go with the way that he spoke, that was for sure. But it was still very memorable. Then there was a time when the room that I was in must have been close to some sort of break area, and in the wee small hours there were two medical staff clearly who were in that space at the same time. Clearly didn't know one another very well. A New Zealand female was speaking, just based on the way they spoke. This is all I could do was hear them. New Zealand female was speaking, and a Chinese guy. To me, it was a Chinese guy whose English wasn't the greatest of English. It was all right, but he clearly hadn't been in New Zealand that long. And so they have this, generic conversation, and then she, the New Zealand woman, asks him, what nationality is he? And he said, New Zealander. Okay. That may legally be true, but it probably wasn't exactly what she was getting at. And then so she said, so, well, what country are you from? And he explains that he's from China. And she's shocked at this. Which was funny all by itself. And then she went on to explain that she thought that he was Korean, which is fine. Less likely, but fine. And then it turns out that the New Zealand sounding lady is actually a Chinese New Zealander. So her parents are from China and whatever, and she's Chinese-ish. And they had this conversation about, what part of China you're from and what languages do you speak. And it turns out that he's from the north or something, and she's her family is from the south or whatever, and he speaks Mandarin and they speak something else. So apologies for my lack of Chinese language knowledge. But anyway, they speak different languages. And then she goes on to explain that she really doesn't speak the language very well anyway, because she's never really had the opportunity to learn it or anything. But she's sort of trying, and then she goes on to say that she's got a small child. Which is exciting. She's got a small child, and she's teaching Chinese to the small child. And she says that although she doesn't really know how to pronounce the words properly, so God knows what she's teaching this small child. But it would be pretty interesting to to experience this kid trying to communicate with people who can't speak Chinese. I don't know. What is the point in trying to teach a foreign language to your child if you yourself don't really know the foreign language? Anyway, I like that story. On a sadder note, the guy that I'm sharing my room with, he was a very short-spoken man, sort of yes, no kind of guy. And it turns out that the ward 1 is mostly about renal patients, so people with problems with their kidneys. So there are people in there who are going off dialysis and stuff the whole time. And it turns out that this guy was also in there for dialysis, but as well as the dialysis, he also had some sort of problems with his lungs. And he ate like a horse and was skinny as a rake. So that sort of had a smell of cancer about it. But that was something sort of gently suggested early on in the in his stay that I overheard. But so just an idea. We should maybe do some tests for that. And then the doctors come around and they say, excuse me, Mr. Blah, Mr. Smith, whatever his name was. It wasn't Smith. Have you had any issues with your stool, for example? Have you had any really black stool or stool with blood in it, anything like that? Don't know. Okay. What about when you're coughing? Have you had any blood in your cough? When you cough, has any blood come out? Don't know. I never look. People, look at your poo. All right, look at your poo. It's a very, very important way to detect problems inside you. There aren't that many ways of getting information from the inside out, and poo is a great way to do it. Poo and pee. So look at it. So he didn't know because he never looked. Okay, so Mr. Smith. So we had some people came down yesterday, I understand, and they wanted to do a heart scan on you, whatever a heart scan is, a heart scan on you, and apparently you refused. Why was that, Mr. Smith? I needed a feed. I was hungry. So this is another tip, right? If you're in the hospital where people are trying to help you and make you better, you do everything you possibly can to help them, right? So if somebody comes down and wants to give you a heart scan, you go, sure. You go, sure, no problem. Anyway, so for him it seemed like everything was a huge inconvenience. So it turns out Mr. Smith does have some more tests, and there's a lump in his lung, and geez, that looks a lot like cancer. And yeah, so they're going to go off and do more things to be 100% sure. But not only does this guy have kidney problems and have to run off and get dialysis, but he also has lung cancer. Lucky guy. And he points out that his granddaughter is having chemotherapy at the moment as well. And she's 7. She's 7. So you learn very quickly when you're in hospital that there are loads more people that are worse off than you. So I feel pretty lucky, really. My final story is this guy. He was in his mid-80s. He was starting to have memory problems, and he was telling all these tales about how he'd been abducted from his house and driven to the middle of a field, and then he was somehow in Queen Street. It turns out the nursing staff have found out from his brother that what had happened was this guy in his mid-80s had fallen off a chair in his kitchen, because he'd bought a whole pile of, this was him explaining, he'd bought a whole pile of cat food, and you never know when something, and therefore he fell on the floor and hurt himself, which is fine. But the sad part about this, that particularly sad part or crazy part, was so he's lived in this house for 30 years and hasn't subdivided anything. So it's a big piece of land, the last big bit of land around or something. And these people next door just keep annoying him trying to buy his land. And he's these people have been after this land for years, and they've offered him millions of dollars for this land. But he's been in this house for 30 years, living by himself, happily enough for 30 years, and he doesn't want to move. And then he sort of says very sadly, because he's got nowhere to go. And, he's having problems falling off chairs because of, the cans of tinned cat food. And he gets angry about this selling his property for millions of dollars. Do you know who the neighbor is? It's a rest home. He has a rest home wanting to buy his property. And he can't think of anywhere to go, or his family can't think of anywhere he could possibly go. The guy that keeps falling over because of cans of cat food. I'm pretty sure you could do a deal here. I think it would be better for everybody, but what do I know? Anyway, it was very entertaining. Well, it was somewhat entertaining. I was entertained from time to time, lying in hospital beds, listening to the various stories. Not that I recommend it, but there you go. I wanted to put in an episode, chapter that was a bit more entertaining, a bit more upbeat. So the next one will be about my experience with the radiology. Cool. See ya.